Should content designers care about vibe coding and AI prototyping? Join me today as I talk about whether content designers need to be using new tools, whether they're going to change how we do our work, and how important are they actually to the future of design. Hi, welcome to Writers of Silicon Valley. My name is Patrick Stafford. I'm your host. Thank you for joining, and welcome back. If you're an old listener, welcome for the first time. If you're a new listener, have a fantastic interview for you today. We're talking about whether content designers need to really care about this whole vibe coding and AI prototyping trend. There's no doubt that some of these new tools like Lovable and Cursor and Replit are very cool, and Figma Make, I should say, is also excellent. Do they actually change the work that content design is doing, and how much do we really need to care about them? So today I'm speaking with someone, David Hamilton, who I would recommend you follow on LinkedIn as an experienced content designer, and we talk all about the different tools that we're using to try different things, but we ask the question, do you really need to care about them? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get to that, just a quick couple of things just to let you know. I know I've talked about this before, but I really hope you check it out. We launched a new course at UX Content Collective this year called Advanced UX Content for Product. I think it's probably I'm very biased, but I think it's the best course that a UX writer or content designer could take right now. We put together an advisory group of experts in the industry. We talked to them about what challenges they're seeing among their teams, and we created a course to help people understand not just how to do great content design, but how to actually understand what a product is. How does content work within that product? We talk about systems thinking, and we talk about how you need to think about how content is modeled across the entire product. So if you're in your career and you're thinking, where do I go from here, whether you're a manager or not, and how do you sort of up your strategic thinking, I would definitely recommend you check it out. You get 20% off as a listener by using Podcast 20. In fact, you get 20% off everything at UX Content Collective if you use Podcast 20. So I highly recommend you check it out. We actually have a couple of excerpts from the course free to read, so I'll post those in the show notes, and you can take a look. But I don't want to keep us any longer. I hate doing intros. I never know what to say, but and they're kind of a waste of time. But I did want to let you know about that, and I really do hope you enjoy this chat with David Hamilton, who I've been trying to get on the podcast for a while. It never quite worked out, but finally we got there. So enjoy, and I'll see you at the end.
West Michigan, Grand Rapids area. It's like the most beautiful part of the country for 2 months out of the year.
For just 2 months.
And then it's like brutally cold usually. Yeah.
I've been around the sort of Midwest area where, a lot of the car manufacturing takes place. And it is interesting to me that so many of the different towns around there, because I have in-laws there, so many of the different towns around there, all of them are just based on car manufacturing. Yeah. And for years, that was the economic base. And for a lot of them still is. It's just, I don't know, overwhelming to me just how much these towns depend on one industry.
It's interesting. It's much more heavily on the east side of the state. I grew up in West Michigan, and I didn't really think about it growing up. But then I would visit the east side, and obviously now working at GM, when I go over there and take trips, I'm like, oh, everything is Ford, Stellantis, GM. And all the markets they create. So it is. I've become aware of that over the past couple of years.
Have you always been in that area, or have you sort of jumped around a bit?
Jumped around a bit. I went to college in West Michigan, and then Chicago area for a bit. My wife and I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Oh, wow. And that's where we had both of our kids, actually. Mm-hmm. She has family there. Loved it there, actually. But then I was traveling a ton for GM. I was coming to Detroit like once or twice a month, and it was just a lot to fly with
And
kiddos
now
at
you have
home.
to deal
So
with Michigan winters, Midwestern winters.
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
I'm really happy to talk to you. I'm really excited to talk to you. I know we've tried to sort of get some time together for a while, and I think that some of the stuff that you're posting is there are certain people on LinkedIn. Whenever I see that they've posted, I always read what they have to say. You're one of them,
It's nice
especially
of you to say.
lately with all of the AI stuff going on and AI prototyping, which we'll sort of get to. But it's interesting for a lot of people when they hear content design or UX writing, they typically think, yeah, mobile app, social media company, finance, car company, like a
Yeah.
little bit different. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into the industry and I guess the type of work you're doing now at GM
Yeah.
and what that involves.
Yeah. Happy to. And first, thank you for saying that. It's very kind of you. I was on LinkedIn early because in a former life, I was a recruiter before I got into this world. And so I had to use it. And that introduced me to the beauty of it. And then it's kind of worked out nicely, but appreciate the kind words. Yeah. So, I mean, it's probably a good segue. When I left college, I thought I was going to go to law school. I am now, by the way, finally, going back to school.
Going back to school?
Part-time. I am going to part-time law school starting next week, actually. But I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And so I kind of stumbled a little bit into what the business world could look like. And at the time when I exited, HubSpot was everywhere. HubSpot was like the thing.
Yep.
And there wasn't really a content design role. There wasn't really content strategy. There was just marketing and content marketing. And so I got into the world by working at a small staffing firm and was the first content marketing person they had. And I worked hand in hand with the CEO at the time to build a website. Like they were doing a new website for the first time. And I got to see up close how we worked with a small agency, how that development team and design team were thinking about the website. And I realized that all of it was narrative based. Like all the decisions I would talk to my CEO about were like framing and how do we think about this idea? And I was intrigued by that. And so I did content marketing for a little bit. And then that got me hooked into this new emerging role of content strategy. And at the time, that was still relatively new. And so I went from agency to agency for a while, being what I would describe as the one content person in a sea of product designers. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of my thing for a little bit. And got to work with some cool big clients along the way. And then kind of fell back into in-house work when the agency I was at in the middle of the pandemic, I was actually writing scripts for the governor of Oklahoma when we lived there of like the COVID-19 crisis. And once that role was done, I got picked up by my first true tech company, a startup that has since gone under. And they're like, hey, you've done a lot of copywriting. What about product writing? And I was like, I mean, yeah, I've done that. I haven't just done that as my job. And that was my first like into the world of Figma, into the world of working with PMs and engineers more than communicators or marketers. And I loved it. I loved it because every word mattered so much. And that brought me to a few different places. And then I started the practice at driveway.com, which was cool. They never had a content design UX writing practice. And at that point, Meta was hiring like crazy,
Mm.
and Meta was knocking and knocking, and they kept knocking. And I was like, sure. I mean, I feel like I owe it to myself to see it through. And they offered me the job, and I took it. And then 11 months later, you had Zuck being like, we're eliminating managers who manage managers. And I was one of those people.
Yeah.
And so at that point is when I did some searching and really fell in love with physical products. Something I really like about GM is the language that I'm working on for the team.
Mm.
Some of it impacts very physical interfaces and impacts people's daily lives and driving decisions. So, been in GM almost 2 years now, and I have a team of 17 right now, content designers, and we're growing too. So
Yeah.
I hope that's helpful, Patrick.
It's very helpful. I mean, it's just everyone who comes on this podcast has a story that's, I started here and then I went there and then I ended up here and now here I am. Like there's no sort of like set path to get there, which is great. I think when people hear GM, they sort of think, at least when I first heard about this, I was kind of like, okay, so are you writing for the interface in the car? Are you writing for like companion apps, desktop things? I imagine you're writing for all of that and more. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a content designer at a car company?
Absolutely. When I joined, it was to lead web and app development. The vehicle practice was its own thing. There's since been multiple org shifts, and that has meant that my scope now includes everything from internal tooling to web to app to vehicle, which is cool because the vehicle stuff is the most complex, in some ways the most maddening to figure out, but the most rewarding. So it does include all those things. So like we write for the error messages that pop up in your dash, or the messages that remind you need to go to the dealer to get something taken care of. And then we write for remote commands for our companion app that says, here's the language to know how to remote start your car or adjust your temperature in your vehicle.
It's interesting because the stuff that you're working on is right now only, I would say, a minority of cars have the type of products you're talking about, right? Where they have a dash or they have a companion app. That will slowly become the norm, right? As old cars phase out. So you're really working on stuff that is not yet adopted by everyone, but eventually will be. It's very interesting because usually in a product situation like yours, you're having to convince people to use your product and convince them to get on board. But the technological shifts in cars, like that's just gonna happen. Like it is just by the virtue of the nature of the industry and how people replace their car every so often. That the framework's going to shift for everyone.
The industry is insane, and I literally go on walks sometimes and power up ChatGPT and just talk about the industry with it for a while because it's changing so quickly. China's development into vehicles, I don't know how much you've jumped into research that, but they are
a little bit,
in an incredible space with the things they're thinking about for interaction patterns. And then you have obviously companies like Tesla and Rivian that are really built differently from OEMs. That right? I would almost describe them as software companies that chose to build cars. Whereas OEMs, traditional OEMs, are manufacturing companies that are trying to wrestle with what does it mean to have really good software. And that like nexus point we're at as an industry is fascinating because you're right. Like not everyone not every car has access to some of those applications. But I think because consumers have been exposed to what a Tesla app experience could be, or a Rivian app could be, there's a new set of expectations for various levels of consumers. So it's really interesting time to be in the industry.
It's funny you mentioned the Chinese market, because I know this isn't the case in America because you have a lot of protections there in terms of imports and so on. Chinese cars are really influencing the market here because we don't have a local manufacturing base for cars anymore. We used to, but we don't anymore. And there are more and more people buying Chinese cars. And it's funny because it's funny we're having this conversation. A couple of years ago, my car was in an accident and I had to get a rental car for a while, and the car I got was a Chinese car. And it was clear, I think, that I don't know whether there was a content design team or a localization team on the software being used. I doubt it. Some of the messages that came up were indecipherable. You know, they were English, but I was reading it and going like, I don't know what this is trying to tell me. And it's funny because it makes you think like the usually in an app, when you're writing an error message, for instance, you just mentioned error messages. That's a good example. You are writing for a range of different use cases. Someone might be doing a bunch of different things on their computer and might be distracted, or they might be, reading something else on a phone. And so what you're really trying to optimize for is attention and clarity, right? In a car situation, I imagine that you have to add safety on top of that.
Yeah.
And so what does that look like in juggling those principles in terms of how it differs from other stuff you've done?
Great observation. I can tell you I underestimated or was ignorant to that fact going in. And if you know anything about GM's history here, safety is kind of a core mantra in the company to make sure that we are protecting our drivers. And it is in some ways for every, I think, OEM, but it really has a strong cultural sense at GM. It comes across in a couple ways. I think most prominently or most obviously is legally, what are the things we have to mention to keep people safe, right? Like, how do we be really, really clear with our writing so we don't ever promise too much or communicate too little? Mm-hmm. That's one. And we actually just hired someone that was formerly at Google that is going to lead on my staff privacy and regulation efforts for content design. The other less obvious one, though, is how do we think of language in a car so that you don't have to think? Because the more time you have to spend digesting something, the more distracted you are. And so I actually take a little bit of a different perspective in my reviews with my staff and say, like, yeah, the company might call this safe, and it is safe, but I want us to add an extra layer when we're looking at text to say, if this pops up, can I understand this in like 2 or 3 seconds?
Yeah.
And that bar is really important because, we all know it's like good interface design principle to do that. But if something is confusing and you're traveling 75 miles per hour with a kid in your backseat, that is way more of an impact, right? Than if something is confusing when you're trying to, order a pair of shoes, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I think about it a lot.
It's interesting that the industry has moved more toward. I shouldn't say the industry. Some manufacturers have moved towards big screens in cars versus the more sort of tactile button approach, because obviously if you rely on physical buttons, you don't have to look to do them, to switch them off or on, especially if they're on a steering wheel and so on. Whereas going on a touch screen creates all sorts of different interaction models and patterns, and you start to understand like what can you put on the screen versus what is a button and so
Yeah.
on. It must be a very fascinating set of debates you have internally about what can or
It,
can't be done digitally and so on.
it's really fascinating, and so much of it is not even inside what you would consider a human interface design team, because there's
Mm,
the industrial design group you have to partner and collaborate with, right? Like um, in a past role, maybe when I was at Meta, like, okay, I'm dealing with an iPhone or an Android or a desktop or a laptop.
mm,
Now, when you write for the interface, you're like, well, this is in the center stack. This might show up in like the center cluster. This might
yeah.
show up here for this passenger. And the interface is wild to think about, because you're right. Contextually, the language deviates so much.
Mm,
And it has to, because the displays are different. And so the language has to be different. It's hard to make sure you're contextually putting in the right language. It's a really fun challenge, but it's definitely different than any other content design role I've held.
especially because of the relationship people have with their cars, right? For some, like for a minority of people, cars are a luxury. They can
Yeah.
go and buy the latest whatever. For most people, a car is a utility that they need.
Right.
And there is so much, I mean, I know you know this, but there is so much baggage associated with what happens if my car breaks down.
Yeah.
What happens if something breaks. And I know, I've never been much of a car person in my life. So, like, more so recently because I got a scanning tool and I've sort of had to educate myself on what different codes are
Yeah.
and so on. But
Yeah.
um, it's amazing how much money that saves you, by the way, when you scan a
Yeah.
tool and you're like, oh, it's just the oxygen sensor. I don't need to go to the
Good for you,
mechanic for that,
man. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just interesting. But yeah, like that adds a different set of emotional priors as opposed to, as you mentioned, working for Meta or
Yeah.
other, sort of equally valid perhaps, but just very different. The stakes are higher.
Yeah. They are, and there's a lot more unintended consequence of language being wrong or not
Mm, yep.
incredibly clear.
Mm,
We one of the first things I did when I took over the writing for the vehicle was like, we have to have a style guide in place,
mm,
and we have tons and tons of taxonomy documented now to make sure we're using language consistently throughout. Because I was like, we can't swap language in the vehicle interface and say something different in the app, because that
yeah.
confusion isn't just annoying, it's potentially like um, harmful if you don't get it right. And it is just a different layer of
Mm,
scrutiny.
yeah. Um, it's interesting that you're hiring more and more people. I think it's a testament, I guess, to the competition and the activity in the market right now. And that's very interesting in the context of what you've been talking about on LinkedIn lately, which is why I really wanted to speak to you
Yeah.
because so you've been speaking a lot about AI prototyping or vibe coding, as you might
As
call
the
it.
kids say.
It's a bit of
Yeah.
a stupid term, but we'll run with it for now. And my question at the moment is: should content designers really care about this? Should content designers care about vibe coding? And so far, my conclusion to that is kind of like yes and no, because it is undeniable that these tools are very cool and very useful. I'm working on a little personal pet project with Lovable at the minute. And it's amazing just how much that they're able to do
Nuts,
for
right?
you.
Yeah.
And it's clear, like, There are some technologies you see and we're like, oh, we're not going back. Like this is now going to be a part of design going forward. How much of it is going to be a part of it and what form that takes, I don't know. That's still shaking itself out, but it's going to be a part of it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I see so much talk about it online, about AI prototyping, and how there was a post on Twitter recently where a Google product manager was saying we're moving from a writing first culture where you
Saw
create
that.
product requirement docs
Yeah.
to a building first culture. And I thought that was an interesting and revealing statement, but also probably has a bit too much of hype in there for me.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You know, people can have their own opinions about that. But I think so. In the sense that this is going to become part of design, yes, I think content designers need to care about it. How much does it actually change the design process for content? I question. I'd be really
Yeah.
curious to hear your thoughts. First of all, just about what you've been doing with these types of tools lately, and what they've revealed to you about how
Yeah.
content plays a role in that process.
I About 6 months ago, I was on the wagon of like, I don't want to talk about AI ever again. I am so tired. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to engage because it was everywhere. And I don't know what clicked or changed, other than the models getting a little better and me getting more and more
Mm-hmm.
curious. But I have really gone all in, not because I think it will change overnight. I don't think most content design teams, there's stereotypical bell curve, right? Like most practices in the middle, I don't know if will change in a year. But I think the teams that are really, really good at advocating for how content design and AI could work well together will massively change because of their relationship with developers.
Hmm.
I think I've seen a few posts and speculation around a new term potentially emerging of like a content engineer. I don't know. Content design has a naming crisis already, like product writer,
Yeah.
UX. I mean, it's nuts, man, right? But what I am really interested in is how do we tokenize content strings to the point that we are writing for the system that writes. It's a
Yep.
little bit like matrixy for me. It's like blue pill, red pill moment. But I do think there's some really cool things that I'm exploring with how can we define the guardrails for a system to write for us.
Hmm.
It's my first thought. I have lots more, so instead of rambling on, I'll let you ask maybe another question.
Well, I mean that observation is in line with a lot of conversations I've had with content designers who are basically saying that their developers are now relying on the design system to give them accurate components, and content guidelines are a part of that. So
Yeah.
that makes complete sense to me. I think where I struggle with seeing I think maybe what I'm struggling with is not the concept, but how far people are pushing it. So they're saying, "Oh, you can just go straight to prototyping." My issue with that, as it relates to content, right, is the fact that if you have 8 or 10, actually two things. I'll start with the first one. Whenever you create uh, uh, something to do in an app, an activity, that's a concept that the user has to grasp, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're just creating new screens and new features because it's easy, you're adding layers and layers and layers of, to use a term some would recognize, cognitive burden on the user, right?
Yeah.
That you're adding more and more concepts that you have to grasp. And laid out in frames, in a traditional sort of artboard on Figma or something, it's very easy to sort of see the physical relationships between those
Yeah.
things. If you're doing AI prototyping first, you're having to click through everything. And so there are things that are, those concepts are hidden. And so you have to kind of go
Yep.
searching for them. So
Yep.
for content design in particular, I can see that being an issue
Yep.
where you're having to think about, okay, well, how many screens are in this? Like, do I know? It's very easy for me to see, 8 frames. If someone hands me a prototype and I'm like, well, it's kind of like a video game. You keep revealing more
Yep.
rooms as you move throughout the levels,
Yeah.
right? So that's my
Yeah.
first real concern about it. I don't know what your
Yeah.
experience has been like with that, but to me, that's what I've discovered just playing with these things.
Yeah. I mean, a couple things. So I think in my spare time, I played with Lovable quite a bit, right? I mean, that's all I think a lot of people are right now. And I've run into the same things where like the complexity you get to is really, really quick, and you have to spend an inordinate amount of time being like, no, it's not quite what I meant. Or
Yeah.
actually, now that I see that it's laid out, to your point, I actually change my approach altogether. And that's a lot of, it's a lot of computational power to do that. And I don't think it needs to be developed, right? You could just, it could just be a design. It doesn't need to be in code yet. So I tend to agree with that for right now. The thing that I'm not sure is getting talked about enough, though, is aside from prompting to design, it's how we are using AI as a practice or as a discipline to operationalize and explain our work at such a faster scale.
Mm-hmm.
Like what tools? So, for example, today I built a custom GPT for my staff just to check in on hiring. Like it was
Okay.
like just to see like where are we at with hiring? What are roles that I'm requesting? What are ones that are approved? And I
Yeah.
prompted it so that there's one conversational place where I or my peers can go and say like, hey, what's David got in the queue? Process development. I have really loved Figma Make to demonstrate cross-functional processes that and I think, before Figma Make could have been like a deck where
Yep.
now I can have like a really beautifully designed web page that looks like I spent 30 hours on it and I spent like 5 prompting it.
Yep.
So, and those aren't as maybe as sexy or as cool because it's not like, oh, you built this app overnight. But those make a really big difference for me as a head of practice because it means I can evangelize the practice without having to spend as much time crafting or polishing
Yep.
decks on decks on decks or repositories.
Yep. That and to be honest, that's where I see. I mean, look, hype takes over everything, right? And so when everything first comes out, you're like, oh my god, everything is going to be like this.
Yeah.
To to me, what I've found is that when creating these applications or creating something straight with Lovable or Cursor or something, there's a threshold, and that threshold is at what point does this become easier to just know how to code?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
you hit that point pretty quickly, like pretty
Yeah.
quickly. You kind of
Yep.
reach that point where you just, and I've seen people on Twitter talking about this where, people are creating applications and ignoring security protocols or just
Yeah.
ignorant of security protocols. And so they've got, a
Yeah.
database of stuff that people can go and access.
Yeah.
And yeah, you begin to start, you don't know what you don't know, basically. And
Yeah.
once you start coding with these types of tools or creating with these types of tools, it becomes very clear what you do not know. So
Yep.
that's one thing. So I think the future of this as it pertains to content design is it's going to be another tool in the tool belt for you to use. So as you mentioned, if you're showing someone something, Easy to take a few frames, drop it in Figma make it a prototype. Just easy, just so you
Yep.
can demonstrate to someone how something
Yep.
is going to work. I don't see it becoming, like the guy from Google said on Twitter, a complete change in how products are built, because it's too easy to see the gaps in doing
Yeah.
that. You know, way
Yeah.
too
And
easy.
and in fact, something I've seen very up close in my role is I actually think there's going to be more need for really strong content designers that are excellent at prompts to help govern the different organization or businesses that think they can do it well,
Yeah,
that think they can rely just on AI. And then it's giving out, maybe it's not even hallucinating, but maybe it's giving out really bizarrely phrased replies to consumers, right? I think, there were those stories back when it was first just like a chat model. Car dealerships legally had to, sell a car to someone that was only $1 because the chatbot said it was $1, right? And
yeah,
and uh, and that's an extreme case, but I think what content designers should be really excited about, and uh, you know what I'm trying to infuse in my staff is look for the opportunities you can help shift the perception of the practice, because you're not just guiding the language. Product managers, engineers, they're going to look to you for your skill set to how you can guide a machine.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's going to be a really valuable skill. And I think our practice could be the ones that end up inheriting a lot of that skill set. And I think that'd be really cool.
I think so too. I think this is why I'm really encouraging a lot of people to develop more about systems thinking and how that works, because as I mentioned, it's very easy when you're AI prototyping to, because things are easy to make, you start thinking well, why not add this? Why not do
Yep.
this? Because
Yep.
it's so easy. And in truth, there are actually quite a lot of reasons why not to do something.
Yep.
And it was why I keep going back to that guy on Google with that the tweet about going from a writing first culture to a building first culture, because in my own experiments with these types of tools, writing out a very clear set of guidelines and
Yes.
instructions and a product
Yes.
requirements document for what I want to build was enormously helpful in guiding the tool. And as you just mentioned, creating those types of very skilled prompts, I think, is a good role for content design to inhabit. And it's why, so we run a workshop and on AI and content design, and one of the things we talk about in there is if what some people have dubbed context engineering lately, a lot of engineering terms popping up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, just trying to give the model as much context as possible in order to create good output. And one of the things that people realize when doing that is they think, oh, I now understand how much documentation and standards my organization doesn't have that I now
Yeah.
need to go and create in order
Yep.
for AI to actually do a good job. So to me, like, as it pertains to vibe coding, I guess you want to call it, content design can really be a supporting layer underneath that to say, cool, you want to use AI prototyping? Great. Let's make sure we have the right documentation in place, the right guidelines, the right rules, the right way of
Yeah.
thinking about how we create different concepts and objects and so on, so that developers can have the confidence to do something knowing they're not going to create all
That's right.
sorts of different trouble and hassle for everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Totally agreed. I think the role of design systems and content standards are going to be even more critical because of that. Because
Yeah.
otherwise you end up spending so much time feeding the context manually, and I mean that is a lot of effort. I mean, I look back at some of my chats with Figma Make, and it's like you're on prompt 75. And it's like, oh man, I could have done this better. But
Yeah.
those prompts make a really big difference. So yeah, I think the system is going to be massively important.
I also think that we're now reaching a point where the scales are starting to fall off the eyes a little bit in terms of what AI can or cannot do. So as we're recording this a couple of days ago, OpenAI had their big GPT-5 announcement,
Yep.
and they hyped it up a lot. I think Sam Altman even tweeted like a picture of a Death Star beforehand,
Yeah.
implying that this was going to be some sort of game-changing announcement. And it came out, and it's pretty good, but it's not an exponential amount of
Yeah.
improvement over the last model. And has also been a little bit of reporting that the AI coding tools like Cursor and Replit and Lovable are actually extraordinarily expensive to run. There was a story in TechCrunch that they might even have negative margins. Don't know if that's true. But I think there is now starting to be a realization about what these tools are actually going to enable and what their limitations might be. And it's
Yeah.
beginning to settle into a little bit of a standard, I guess. What's been interesting to me is watching how content design has fared during all of this. Because a few years ago, there was a lot of fear that content design was going to be replaced by AI tools. I
Yeah.
have no doubt some companies are trying to do that, but I'm sure, as you've found, it's actually more work to do that a lot of the time than it is to
Yep.
just keep a few content designers around
Yep.
if you're doing a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, just briefly, again, I think it's the bell curve analogy. I think if you don't care about the core experience, do all AI. But
Yeah.
if you care, like, about the human that has to read what your AI generated tool is going to dish out, which you should if you want to stay in business, really quickly you're going to realize you should probably have a content designer or two on staff to help regulate it so it doesn't send out emails that are never read or ads that don't make any difference.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the GPT-5 topic is really fascinating to me. I wrote about it actually in a Substack. I'm starting to spend time on lately, and I I think there's the classic like how many R's are in strawberry, right? I saw that meme
Right.
all the time where it was like it's one or two, and it's like no, it's three. Isn't this thing is so stupid?
Yep.
I mean, yeah, I listened to Sam's the PR stunts too, and I listened to his podcast with Theo Vaughn the other day, and he was talking it up. I'm more fascinated by the behavioral norm we're entering into, where I really do though think we're about to see a similar pattern disruptor that happened when the internet became like um, a search engine. I don't
Yep.
think we've had this disruptive of a technology for how we engage with a machine. But
Mm.
again, it still requires a human. And I
Yep.
think to your point, there's still a human machine relationship. I'm just really fascinated about how the interface of that relationship is changing.
Well, this isn't really related to content design so much, but I can tell you that in this year, 5% of traffic to the UX Content Collective now comes from chatbots.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Wow.
what we found is that people who come from those chatbots are more likely to convert. The conversion
Wow.
rate is extremely high. So
Oh,
what
that's fascinating.
what I'm assuming is happening is that they're trusting it much more. So
Yeah.
if the AI tells me that this is the one to go with, then that's what I need to do. And so I've been spending a lot of my time thinking about how do I make sure that our courses and information or whatever are surfaced by these types of models. But I think you're right. There's a trust there that is happening because these tools are anthropomorphized, right? Like they talk to you in first person, and I know that there's a lot happening right now with regard to using AI as a therapist.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I would really love to get Chelsea Larson back on the podcast.
Oh
I
yeah.
love talking to
Yeah.
Chelsea, and she's at Anthropic
Yeah.
now. I would love to talk to her about how they're thinking. I don't know if she'd be able to reveal much, but it's a fascinating issue because people are now using the. I mean, I don't. Have you seen the movie Her with Joaquin
Yeah.
Phoenix? Yeah,
Yeah.
10 years
Yeah.
ago that was a fantasy, and now it's literally happening.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Chelsea's brilliant, first of all. So can I plus one getting her back on the
Yeah.
podcast? She's really honest with her. It's been fun to watch her build at Anthropic, almost behind the scenes. She's sharing some really honest takes on LinkedIn lately about like things are moving really fast and I'm trying to do it. So just that's an aside, but it's cool. My dad is a therapist, and he's also
Really?
he was a developer before he was a therapist, and so we have been talking a lot about this intersection and thinking about because I don't know, maybe this is just correlation versus causation, but his services are in a demand that are absolutely insane right now.
Really?
And at the same time, you have, I just read before I popped on this recording, people praising Sam for bringing back previous models to GPT-5 because they lost something in that and they felt like they lost part of themselves. And it poses some really interesting questions for me that I think a lot about in terms of trust for our websites, even at GM. Like, so if we're looking at different model outputs, what are the rules and regulations we should have to make sure someone knows they're chatting with an AI? Is that enough? You know, the caveat almost becomes so norm. It's not even read anymore that like this is produced by AI and AI can make mistakes. Check your, you know, and it's like, I don't know, man. Does anyone read that? Yeah. Does anyone read that anymore? And so it does, but I care a lot about it because talking to my dad and knowing how people react to those things, I think the responsibility we have as content designers puts us in a really interesting spot to care about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I think the hard part is that with AI especially, the use cases can vary so wildly from I'm using this to create art that looks like Studio Ghibli to what does this bug in my code mean? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and so when people talk about using AI, there's so much wrapped up in that. And I wonder what you think. What should content designers be doing right now? Because I think everyone's tried GPT, everyone's tried Claude, all that sort of stuff. People are familiar with it. So what do you think content designers should be spending their time right now with regard to these types of tools?
First and foremost, I would say build a custom GPT. Not because you want to make money off it. I mean, if you do, that's cool. Good for you. But build it so that you can understand how the system reacts to different prompts and how it matures over time, how it can hallucinate or not. I've encouraged everyone on my staff to do that, just to get a feel for what that's like. It also gives you a really clear snapshot into things you have to include, like always pull data sources from this, never this, or only remember these things. If you don't know something, say you don't know it versus telling something that you made up because you want to give an answer. That's the best way. First and foremost, I think content designers should engage is whatever platform you use, whether it's Claude, or if you're a Copilot organization, or GPT, build your custom agent and play around with it. The second thing I would say is, if you want to thrive in the next few years in this space and not go nuts with AI, is you should really be careful about the people you're listening to in this space. You mentioned Chelsea. She's one of the people that I tune into when I'm curious about what's happening. There's so much hype, man, around what's going on in this world. And I think content designers, maybe because we're such empathetic people, because we're by nature, but I mean, people get you could really psych yourself out. Like, am I going to have a job? Do I need to pivot careers? I mean, I would just be really careful about who you follow and tap into. And I guess the last thing, I mean, you already mentioned it, is I have fallen in love with systems in a way that I never have before in my content design career, because the AI models require systems to be effective. Mm-hmm. And if you can actually understand how content componentry and content design systems work, I think you're going to be really well positioned to prompt models effectively at your organization.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing I've been thinking about recently as well is taste, and how that's going to become the differentiator. You know, if everyone can do anything with an AI model, why use one app over another? And that's taste. And so that means reading books, looking at art, you know, watching movies, TV shows, like all sorts of different things, getting inspiration from very human things, and then bringing that to any experience you create. I think that's going to be, and even more, I think content design then becomes the differentiator, because if everything looks the same, how it speaks to you becomes even more important.
I think that's spot on, because AI will always get someone to 95% of the work. And so now we're not competing on the 95%. We're competing on the last 5%.
Yeah.
PayPal's chief design officer has some really interesting takes on this. I follow her, and she's got a really cool voice in terms of how she sees design moving up the stack when it comes to development because of AI. But her theme, as far as I can tell, their meta, is that taste is kind of the last moat. So she's got some cool thoughts there too. Jen Schaefer is there now, leading the content design practice. I know you've had Jen on your show before, but she might have some cool things to say about it.
I actually haven't had Jen on the show before. I have. I'm a big fan of Jen. She was one of our first supporters at UXCC. I'd love to get her on the show, actually. She would be a great one to speak. There are lots of people I'd like to get on the show.
Yeah.
It was very hard at the begining, because people were like, who are you? Like, what are you talking about? And then I've gotten to know a lot more people, so it's become a little bit easier. David, we're just about running out of time. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for this. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful just to chat about it, and good to actually put a face to the LinkedIn messages. LinkedIn is the best way to find me. I mean, I spend a lot of time there. I care a lot about building really good teams wherever I am. So I care about having a good pool of people that are passionate about this craft. And then if you follow me there, I do have a Substack post and channel I'm trying to get off the ground. So you can feel free to follow me there for things on AI or content design leadership or whatever else that pops into my noggin.
I'll link to both of those for everyone.
Cool.
David, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Appreciate it.
All right, that was my interview with David Hamilton. I hope you got something out of that, and I hope that you will go and at least try out some of these tools, even if you decide that they may not change your way of working forever. I think they're still worth getting to know. So again, just a reminder, you get 20% off everything at UX Content Collective using podcast 20. Check out Advanced UX Content for Product. I'll put those excerpts in the show notes, and I hope you will join me again next time. See you soon.